President Trump is claiming victory after the release of the Mueller report. After the Attorney General spoke to the press Thursday morning, the president tweeted this Game of Thrones-inspired photo, writing, quote, "No collusion, no obstruction." And after the report's release, a couple of hours later, Mr. Trump said he was having a good day.
And they're having a good day. I'm having a good day, too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction. There never was, by the way, and there never will be.
While the president takes a victory lap, Democrats are demanding answers. CBS's Nicole Killian reports from the White House.
The 400-page report was delivered to Congress on a CD-ROM, nearly 2 hours after Attorney General William Barr laid out the findings.
The special counsel confirmed that the Russian government sponsored efforts to illegally interfere with the 2016 presidential election, but did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts.
But on the issue of obstruction, the report noted, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. However, we are unable to reach that judgment.
The report points to 10 episodes of possible obstruction, including the president's firing of FBI Director James Comey, and it suggests the president tried to seize control of the Russia probe.
When the president found out a special counsel had been appointed, he told then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency." The report adds, at one point, the president directed then White House counsel Don McGahn to call the acting attorney general and say Mueller must be removed because of conflicts of interest. Democrats want the full unredacted report and to hear from Mueller directly.
I think it was probably written with the intent of providing Congress a roadmap.
Attorney General Barr says he will allow congressional leaders to see a less redacted version of the report. Nicole Killian, CBS News, the White House.
Let's bring in Molly Hooper, Shermichael Singleton, and Antjuan Seawright. Molly is a CBSN political contributor. Shermichael is a Republican political consultant. Antjuan is a CBSN political contributor, Democratic strategist, and CEO of Blueprint Strategies. Molly, I want to start with you. Democrats want to see Robert Mueller on the Hill. They want him to testify. If and when that happens, what are you looking for there?
Well, I think it's pretty telling. Earlier today, Andre Carson, who's a member of the Intelligence Committee, and doesn't generally issue statements reactive to things, and he came out and it was pretty interesting. He said, that the special counsel can only go so far, and for this reason, this report is not a conclusion, but an additional resource for Congress to use as it continues its investigation into foreign meddling in our election and possible illegal activity by the president. So yes, I think that we will see Mueller before the committees. It's unclear if he will be, in public, probably before the Judiciary committees, possibly behind closed doors for intel, but lawmakers want to hear from him. They want to hear straight from the horse's mouth. Both sides have praised Bob Mueller. Republicans have, taken aim at him. But after this report, Republicans are praising him. They want to hear from him.
Shermichael, a number of Republicans, though, have said they don't want to hear from him, including Senator Lindsey Graham. Why not?
Well, look, I think from Republicans' perspective, they don't want something publicly stated that could harm the president. Because, again, the president is up for re-election. But I do think that there are some underlying questions that Democrats are really going to want to get to as it relates to obstruction. Who did Mueller intend to make that decision, Barr or Congress? I also think there are going to be questions about that Trump Tower meeting. Why wasn't Trump Jr. forced to testify before the grand jury? Or is he potentially being investigated by maybe the Southern District of New York or maybe in Virginia? So I do think that there are some outlying questions that Democrats will seek that Republicans just don't want out there because of the potential political damage and implications for the president.
Antjuan, is there a risk of political damage to Democrats if they get too focused on the Mueller report?
Absolutely. But let's slow down for a second. First of all, I'm still spinning crazy because of the spin that was from that press conference at 9 a.m. The fact of the matter is it was just a public relations effort by Trump's AG to really put a spin on the report to try to frame it so that the president can claim victory today. Secondly, there have been many responses we've seen to this report. But what those of us in the political business know, there is a legal response and there's a political response. And while Trump is tweeting about the game is over, but what he does not know, the game has just begun. Because thankfully, because of the most consequential midterm elections of my lifetime, Democrats have control over the House. Therefore, you're going to see investigations and legislation being done on the Democratic side, and they're going to haul and call people in to get the truth under oath, including the special prosecutor. I would not be surprised if Don Jr., who, by the way, was so dumb he did not even know he was committing a crime based on what we've seen from the report. And thirdly, what this president does not fully understand, apparently, is that the most important line in that report to me was said that this does not exonerate the president, which gives Congress their authority and right to serve as the oversight and legislative branch, and I think they're going to do that.
Well, and just to pick up on this point, when the Republicans took control of the House, several, Congresses ago, that's when the Tea Party Republicans came into power, and they were under a lot of pressure, tremendous pressure to stop Obamacare funding, essentially. And yet that's sort of when the first long government shutdowns happened. And it's sort of a similar situation right now with House Democrats. You have leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer who are saying, focus on the bread and butter issues. Focus on the issues that your voters are thinking about every day. Do they have a job? But you have House Democrats who are newly energized, engaged, more progressive-leaning Democrats who are going to be pushing for action, impeachment inquiries.
I was going to say the I word is starting to come up again.
But as someone who worked with House Democrats, I would tell you, do not let the enemy, the Republicans, drive the narrative, or some of the media, that you can't investigate and legislate. Because you know the Rob Bass song, it takes two to make the thing go right. You can do both.
Have we gotten to the point, though, where we're referring to the other side as the enemy as part of the problem?
Absolutely, because they referred to us as the enemy, as to some of the worst human beings. I can go on and on about the names that some of Shermichael's friends will call Democrats at times.
Well, I remember when some Republicans were called Hitler. I remember when Newt Gingrich was called Hitler by Democrats. So it kind of goes both ways. Just covering Congress. Oh my gosh, the mudslinging, it can get really muddy.
Well, look, this does become a cyclical thing, but I do agree with Antjuan that there is an appetite, particularly with the more progressive elements of the Democratic Party, to investigate. But I do think that's why you see Nancy Pelosi also saying, let's be careful and strategic, surgical in how we approach this, because what you don't want to do is cause undue or unnecessary harm to 2020 candidates. You also don't want to risk losing seats in the House. You don't want to risk governorships. State legislatures are going to be up for re-election in the next 2 years, and she recognizes that. So I think while she understands that's what the base wants, she also understands the political implications. Let's not forget what happened with Newt Gingrich in the 90s with Republicans. They paid a huge price for going after Bill Clinton too much, and Nancy Pelosi does not want to make that same mistake.
I tell you what's lost in this release today is timing. We know that timing is everything. The devil's in the details. The fact that we are one day away from Good Friday, Holy Week, the Congress is not in session. We have this report and a press conference issue. It gave very little room for response from Democrats to respond to this press conference and the release of the report. And so all we've seen really is a public relations effort by the right and a public relations response from the left. And so that makes it even crazier. And so
we're seeing a lot of spin, and it's a 400-plus page report.
Why do you think I'm about to fall out of my chair? I'm spinning out of control.
Please don't fall out of the chair yet. We're not done with you. I want to put up a comment from Senator Liz Warren, if I can here. She said, quote, "By the time we get to 2020, Donald Trump may not even be president. In fact, he may not even be a free person." Antjuan, do you see a political consequence for Democrats if they keep raising impeachment again and again and again leading up to 2020?
Absolutely. I think there's a way to do everything and there's a way to talk about everything. And thankfully, we have not heard much on the Democratic campaign trail from 2020 candidates about this report, because I don't think we put our 2020 eggs in this basket. Instead, you've heard a laser focus, I think, on quality of life issues, barbershop, beauty salons. If you live in in South Carolina is Lizard Thicket, Kiki's Chicken and Waffles, and Big T barbecue issues. Those are the things we hear constantly from candidates, like how do we do affordable housing? How do we raise the wages? How do we pay our teachers? How do we have access to affordable quality health care? That's what you've been hearing, regardless of what some in the right may say.
Well, the reality is on the campaign trail, voters, and whether it's New Hampshire, Iowa, Ohio, are not asking about this report. That's the reality. And the advisors
Nor do they care.
Do they care? And the advisors to those Democratic candidates recognize this. Elizabeth Warren needs to be very, very careful here in her rhetoric, because though Donald Trump won those key electoral states by less than 100,000 votes, it only takes that much for those individuals to give him another re-election, if you will. And that's why I think those candidates are being very careful with their tone.
Which is actually kind of interesting, because going forward, if you think about, and this is why I love covering the Senate and the House, but the Senate these days, oh, the Judiciary Committee is great. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, they're all going to be, in the spotlight when Mueller comes up, because even though Graham says he doesn't really want to hear from Mueller, there's going to be a lot of pressure to hear from Mueller. And also, Graham, if he decides to pursue this other investigation of the investigators, will want to hear from Mueller in that respect.
I want to play a clip real quick from Kellyanne Conway. Here's what she said Thursday morning following the report's release.
He doesn't need a point-by-point rebuttal. You know what his greatest rebuttal will be? His greatest rebuttal will be he's in office, he's going to remain in office, and he'll get reelected. Because the Democrats have nothing. They banked everything on this. You have 15, 18 people running for president and not a single message that doesn't involve Trump, 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 Trump.
Michael, did we just hear the re-election slogan?
Well, sure, Michael.
I mean, look, I think so. And the president is going to give a political rally next week during the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And you can guarantee he's going to hammer this home. I mean, I've received several emails thus far from the re-election campaign saying, I'm innocent for a second time, no collusion. Democrats will not give this up. That is something that I think for the president potentially could work not only with his most ardent supporters, but you also have to keep in mind independent GOP-leaning voters. You have to keep in mind those more moderate centrist Republican voters who actually could be open and amendable to the right Democratic candidate who may say, I'm sticking with Trump if Democrats overplay their hand here.
No
and
doubt,
what's going through your mind when Kellyanne was talking?
Kellyanne Conway is again dizzying her thought per the usual. But what I will say about 2020 is that you will have a Democratic Party who I think will be in well positioned to make some strong gains. The Senate maps look better for us than it did in 2016. We have the ability to expand our numbers in the Congress. We have I think a small niche to be able to pick up some governor seats and win some state legislative seats if we do the right thing, as Spike Lee told us.
But I think, if I could quickly, I do think it's ultimately going to come down to infrastructure. This is going to be very tight. It's going to come down to who can turn out their base the most. And what I think what's going to be difficult for whomever the presumptive Democratic nominee is how can you bring together this fractured and divided group of people who are going to have loyalties to a plethora of candidates in comparison to 2016. It was already difficult for Hillary Clinton with Bernie Sanders supporters. Imagine how difficult it will be with 18, 19, or 20 different groups out there.
But you and I talked about this morning. This, no doubt, is going to allow the president's base to collapse to a certain degree, meaning they're going to go home. Republicans are going to go home. You're going to have Democrats who are going to go in their corner. So the fight is going to be for the independent voters and the independent thinkers, and that's where the real fight is going to be. And that's why Democrats have to be really careful not to go too far, but stay laser focused on issues, because while Republicans tend to fall in line, we fall in love, and we cannot allow that to happen this time around.
You know, this is the 71-page summary that our crack Washington Bureau put together. I'm not as strong as David Begnaud, so I don't have the whole 400-page report to flaunt around here. But, you know, Main Street isn't reading this.
No.
And I don't know that Main Street is even talking about it. D.C. is going to be in a tizzy about this for weeks. Does anything in here move the ball on either side at all in a measurable way for 2020?
Well, it's a good reminder, and sometimes this gets lost in all the conversation, is that the fact that Russia interfered in our elections to help Donald Trump win the office of presidency. That cannot get lost. So Democrats and Republicans have to come together and figure out how to prevent that from happening in 2020. And then
should that be their message, Democrats' message?
That should be part of what we talk about collectively, the legislative bodies. But what also cannot get lost is the fact that there are redacted parts in this that I think are probably the most important parts of this report that we just don't know what it says. All we can do is make assumptions that it's redacted for a reason, and the fact of the matter is, where Republicans are trying to put spin and say it's a threat to national security, etc., that was not the case for the Devin Nunes memo just a few months ago. There was no apologies about releasing the Devin Nunes memo.
But if we do talk about underlying evidence and we go all the way back to Watergate, the American public we haven't seen that information yet. I think that's the right call. But I do think it is interesting, to your question, there's a significant amount of data and surveys that indicates for the average person, you talk about those bread and butter issues, this just isn't important. Healthcare, the economy, can I put food on the table? Immigration, I mean, even for millennials, can I afford a house after graduating
from
college? Those are the most key issues. And to your point, if Democrats with the right messenger can hone in on that and target those voters in those key electoral states, again, I do think you could have a winning candidacy for whomever that individual is.
Molly, we just had a Republican and Democrat agree on something. You get the last word, but it's got to be quick.
Well, I just want to echo this point. You know, when I would talk to lawmakers, even in the thick of it, you know, back in 2017 when Comey was fired and whatnot, and I'd talk to lawmakers and be like, okay, so what are your voters, what are they saying about Russia? And they'd be like, I'd love to tell you they're saying a lot, but really they want to know about taxes. They want to know about what's going to happen with infrastructure. Are we going to have an infrastructure bill? And I think that, you know, that has been a refrain that continues to go on. But for those of us inside the Beltway, I mean, you can't get enough of this report. I'm just going to be reading it all night.
What would we talk about if this report didn't come out?
What would we be doing?
Y'all, this was fun. Thanks so much.